Welcome to PodWeCast. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more great content. And if you enjoy this video, give it a thumbs up. Let's dive in.
All right, let's get those detective hats on, everyone, because we are diving deep into the world of criminal profiling today.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, it really is.
I love it.
So we're going to unpack how those brilliant minds in law enforcement use psychology, deduction, intuition to crack the most baffling cases. Think Silence of the Lambs meets Sherlock Holmes.
I like it.
Our guide for this deep dive is the true crime podcast Mystery Files.
Okay.
And their series on how detectives actually approach a case.
Awesome.
So it's going to be really interesting.
It's a fascinating journey, really. You see, criminal profiling is often portrayed as this almost mystical ability.
Right?
But in reality, it's a very meticulous process.
Okay, so let's break it down.
Yeah.
What are the building blocks of a criminal profile? What do these profilers actually look for?
Well, they're like meticulous puzzle solvers, basically, piecing together a picture of this unknown perpetrator.
Okay.
3 core elements form the foundation: modus operandi, victimology, and signature.
Modus operandi. Sounds very official.
It does, doesn't it?
Can you unpack that a bit more for us?
Of course.
Yeah.
Modus operandi, or MO, is essentially the how of the crime.
Okay.
It refers to the specific techniques and methods the criminal uses to commit the crime.
Right.
Think of it as their operational playbook.
So, for instance, a burglar who always disables alarm systems in a particular way, that would be part of their MO.
Exactly. And by analyzing the MO across multiple crimes, investigators can start to link seemingly unrelated cases.
Oh, okay.
Identify patterns and even predict the perpetrator's future actions.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And what about victimology?
Yeah.
I feel like I've heard that term
Of course.
thrown around in true crime shows, but I'm not really sure what it means.
Victimology delves into the why of the crime, focusing specifically on the victim.
Okay.
It's about understanding the victim's background, their lifestyle, relationships, routines, to determine why they were targeted.
So it's not just about who the victim was,
Yeah.
but why they were chosen by the perpetrator.
Precisely. Sometimes the victim's profile can reveal crucial information about the perpetrator's motives,
Okay.
their hunting grounds, or even their psychological makeup.
Wow.
It's about figuring out what made this particular victim vulnerable in the eyes of the offender.
That's fascinating. It almost seems like getting to know the victim is as important as understanding the perpetrator.
Yes, very much so.
And you mentioned a third element, signature.
Yes.
What makes that stand out from the MO?
Okay, so while the MO is about practical technique, the signature is more about the psychological imprint the offender leaves behind.
Oh, okay.
It's a distinct, often unnecessary act committed by the offender at the crime scene that goes beyond what's required to complete the crime.
So it's almost like a calling card.
Yeah.
Something they do to satisfy a psychological need
Yes.
rather than a practical one?
Exactly. Think of it as a glimpse into their psyche.
Okay.
For example, a killer might always leave a specific object at the crime scene, arrange the body in a particular way, or leaves behind a cryptic message. These actions aren't necessary for the crime itself, but they hold significance for the offender.
That's both intriguing and disturbing.
Yeah.
Why would a killer risk leaving behind such a potentially incriminating clue?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
It could be a need for control, a desire to taunt authorities, or even a twisted sense of artistry.
Right.
The signature can often reveal the offender's psychological needs, their fantasies, and even their level of sophistication.
Wow. This whole profiling thing is much more complex than I ever imagined.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like trying to decode a secret language, looking for those hidden clues
Yes.
that reveal the inner workings of a criminal's mind. That's just the tip of the iceberg, huh?
And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, wow.
Once you delve into the psychology of the offenders, the different categories and motivations, it gets even more fascinating.
Well, you've certainly piqued my curiosity. Let's dive into those psychological profiles.
Okay.
What are some of the common categories that profilers use to understand the minds of criminals?
Well, one way to categorize them is by their primary motivation.
Okay.
You have your power-oriented offenders who are driven by a need for control and dominance.
Okay.
Then you have those driven by anger and revenge who are seeking retribution for perceived wrongs.
Right.
There are also those motivated by financial gain
Sure.
who see crime as a means to an end. And of course, we can't forget about the sexually motivated offenders whose crimes are driven by twisted desires and fantasies.
That Mystery Files podcast had this one chilling example of a power-oriented killer who was leaving clues at the crime scene.
Yes.
Almost like he was playing a game with the police.
Oh, that's a classic example of an offender who gets off on the feeling of superiority, of outsmarting the authorities.
Right.
Imagine the pressure on the detective in that scenario. Not only do you have to catch the killer, you're also engaged in this psychological chess match with someone who thinks they're always one step ahead.
That's intense.
Yeah.
Speaking of high-stakes cases, Mystery Files highlighted some famous ones.
Yes.
Where profiling played a crucial role. The Zodiac Killer, for example.
Right.
How does a case like that, with all those cryptic messages and codes, fit into this profiling framework?
The Zodiac Killer is a perfect example of how an offender's desire for control and recognition can manifest in their crimes.
Okay.
Remember the signature we talked about? The Zodiac's coded letters and symbols weren't just about communication.
Right.
They were a power play, a way to instill fear.
Okay.
And to elevate himself above everyone else.
Becky wanted to be infamous.
Exactly.
To have his name etched in the annals of criminal history as this brilliant, untouchable mastermind.
Exactly. And that craving for notoriety made him incredibly difficult to catch.
Oh, wow.
He was organized, intelligent, and manipulated the investigation through his carefully crafted communications. Profilers recognized this need for control early on.
Right.
And it helped them understand his motivations, even though they ultimately couldn't prevent further crimes.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And frankly, a bit terrifying. How someone's personality can be so clearly reflected in their crimes.
Absolutely.
And then there's Ted Bundy, who was notoriously charming and charismatic.
Yeah.
Which makes his horrific acts even more disturbing.
Absolutely.
How does someone like that fit into this whole profiling picture?
Bundy is a classic example of what profilers call an organized offender.
Okay.
He was meticulous, controlled, and incredibly adept at blending into society.
Right.
He planned his attacks carefully, often using ruses to lure his victims, and he managed to maintain a facade of normalcy that masked his true nature.
That's almost like he was a chameleon.
Exactly.
Adapting to whatever situation suited his twisted needs.
Exactly. But even the most organized criminals leave behind patterns, clues that can help investigators connect the dots. In Bundy's case, it was his specific victim type, the way he approached them.
Okay.
And certain ritualistic behaviors that eventually linked his crimes across multiple states.
It's amazing how detectives seem to approach a crime scene almost like a story.
Yes.
They're not just looking at the physical evidence, but they're also trying to read between the lines to find the narrative that reveals the who, what, and why of the crime.
You're absolutely right. Every detail at a crime scene becomes a piece of the puzzle.
Right.
A clue that helps tell the story of what happened.
Right.
The position of the body, signs of a struggle, any missing items.
Yeah.
It all contributes to building a picture of the events and the individuals involved.
So what kind of story does a chaotic crime scene tell?
Oh, that's interesting.
Versus one that is meticulously staged. What can investigators learn from that initial impression?
That's a great question. A chaotic crime scene, one that appears frenzied and disorganized, often indicates a more impulsive offender, someone driven by strong emotions like rage or passion. On the other hand, a meticulously staged scene where everything is carefully arranged often points to a more controlled, deliberate personality.
Okay.
Someone who wants to maintain a sense of power and control, even in the midst of their crime.
It's chilling to think that someone could be so calculated,
so
in control, even when committing such a horrific act. And speaking of control, let's delve a bit deeper into the behavioral patterns that criminals exhibit. I'm particularly interested in those killers who take trophies from their victims.
Yes.
That's always seems so bizarre to me. Why would they do that?
It's a disturbing phenomenon, but it's not uncommon.
Right.
Taking trophies is often about maintaining a connection to the crime.
Okay.
A way for the offender to relive the act and hold on to the sense of power and control they felt during the commission of the crime.
Wow. That's really dark.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder,
how
do investigators even begin to understand the why behind such a complex motivation? If you were trying to decipher why a killer targets specific victims, where would you even start?
That's where victimology becomes incredibly important.
Okay.
It's about delving into the victim's life, their habits, relationships, routines, to see if there's anything that might have made them particularly vulnerable.
Right.
Or attractive to the offender.
So you're saying that understanding the victim can be just as crucial as understanding the killer?
Absolutely. It's all part of piecing together the larger puzzle.
Okay.
Sometimes the victim's profile can lead investigators directly to the perpetrator,
Right.
or at least narrow down the pool of suspects.
Okay.
It's about finding those connections, those seemingly insignificant details
Right.
that suddenly make everything click into place.
We've talked a lot about logic and analysis,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm curious about the gut feeling that many detectives rely on.
Yeah.
Is that just a Hollywood myth, or is there some truth to it?
It's definitely not a myth. Intuition plays a significant role in criminal investigations. But it's not about some magical sixth sense.
Right.
That intuition is actually born from years of experience,
Yeah.
from studying countless cases and from recognizing subtle patterns and inconsistencies that might not be immediately obvious to an untrained eye.
So it's not just a random hunch.
No.
It's informed by a deep understanding of criminal behavior.
Precisely. And sometimes that gut feeling can lead to breakthroughs that pure logic might miss.
Oh, wow.
The Mystery Files podcast mentioned a case where a detective had this nagging feeling about a seemingly unimportant detail.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be the key that unlocked the entire case.
That's amazing.
It really is.
So it's like a blend of experience,
Yeah.
observation, and this almost subconscious understanding of how criminals think and operate.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the rigorous mental training that detectives undergo.
Right.
They're constantly honing their skills, practicing memory exercises, situational awareness drills, and even studying psychology to better understand human behavior. They're like mental athletes, constantly pushing themselves to be sharper, faster, and more insightful.
They have to be, especially when they're faced with those high-pressure situations
Right.
where every decision counts.
Right.
But, you know, we've only scratched the surface of this fascinating world of criminal profiling.
I know, right?
Mystery Files. It covered so many more cases.
Yeah.
That really highlighted the power and sometimes the limitations of this investigative tool.
Yes.
So let's dive into a few more of those intriguing cases.
Absolutely. There are so many compelling stories that demonstrate the intricate dance between the criminal mind and those who seek to understand it.
Let's start with the Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway, who terrorized the Seattle area for years.
Oh, yes. The Green River Killer, Gary Ridgway, was a chilling example of how a meticulous and organized offender can evade capture for years.
Right.
He preyed on vulnerable women, often sex workers,
Okay.
and disposed of their bodies in remote areas along the Green River, effectively erasing their presence from society.
He sounds like a true monster, exploiting those who are already marginalized and overlooked.
Yeah, it's a very sad case.
What made him so difficult to catch?
Several factors contributed to his elusive nature.
Okay.
He was incredibly cautious,
Right.
avoiding risky behaviors that might attract attention.
Okay.
He also blended seamlessly into his surroundings,
Right.
appearing completely ordinary to those who knew him.
Yeah.
And perhaps most disturbingly,
Okay.
his choice of victims, women who were often on the fringes of society,
Right.
meant their disappearances weren't always immediately noticed or investigated with the same urgency as others.
It's heartbreaking to think that their vulnerability made them easier targets.
It really is.
But even the most meticulous criminals leave behind traces, right? How did investigators finally start to close in on Ridgway?
Profilers played a crucial role.
Okay.
They analyzed his behavior patterns,
Right.
the specific locations where he chose to dispose of his victims,
Okay.
and the types of victims he targeted. This allowed them to create a psychological portrait of the killer,
Right.
which helped narrow down the suspect pool and prioritize certain leads.
So even though they didn't have a name or a face right away,
Right.
that profile helped them understand his motives, his habits,
Yeah.
and ultimately it contributed to his capture.
Exactly. It's like having a blueprint,
Right.
a framework that guides the investigation even when concrete evidence has also led to some missteps in the investigation.
I remember reading about that case.
Yeah.
It was a terrifying time for women in England.
It was.
What went wrong with the profiling in that case?
The initial profile suggested the killer was someone who hated women,
Okay.
perhaps driven by a history of rejection or abuse.
Right.
They focused on finding someone who fit that image,
Right.
someone who was outwardly aggressive or misogynistic.
Right.
However, Sutcliffe didn't fit that mold at all.
Right.
He was married, seemingly ordinary,
Okay.
and able to blend into society with ease.
So the Profile created a sort of tunnel vision,
Yeah.
blinding investigators to other possibilities.
Exactly. They were so focused on finding someone who fit the profile
Right.
that they overlooked other potential suspects,
Right.
including Sutcliffe, who didn't match the preconceived image they had in mind.
It's a cautionary tale, a reminder that profiling should be used to guide the investigation, not to dictate it.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You need to remain open to other possibilities. To consider all the angles, even if they don't fit the initial profile. But despite its limitations, profiling has undoubtedly helped solve countless cases, right? What are some examples where it really made a difference?
Absolutely. The case of John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, is a chilling but compelling example of how profiling helped investigators understand the mind of a seemingly normal individual who was harboring a dark secret.
Oh, that case is terrifying.
It is.
He was a respected member of his community.
He was.
Even entertaining children at parties, all while hiding a horrific truth.
That's what made him so dangerous.
Right.
He used his outward persona, his clown mask, to hide his true nature, a deep-seated need for power and control. Profilers recognize this pattern, identifying him as a classic power control killer who derived gratification from the suffering of his victims.
It's a reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places, hiding behind masks of normalcy and respectability. And that's why profiling is so crucial. It helps us see beyond the surface, to recognize the potential for darkness, even in those who seem harmless.
Exactly.
The BTK killer, Dennis Rader, is another case that demonstrates this.
Yes, absolutely.
I've heard of BTK, but I'm not that familiar with the details. What made his case so noteworthy from a profiling perspective?
Rader was a fascinating study in the psychology of serial killer. He craved recognition and notoriety. He wanted to be infamous, to instill fear, and have his name whispered in terrified tones.
So his desire for attention was ultimately his undoing.
Exactly. After years of silence, he couldn't resist the urge to reemerge, to remind everyone of his existence. He started sending letters to the police again, boasting about his crimes and demanding attention. This time, however, he made a crucial mistake. He included a floppy disk with one of his letters.
And that floppy disk was traceable back to him.
Exactly. His arrogance and need for recognition led directly to his capture.
It's a recurring theme with these types of offenders.
It often is.
Their desire to be seen, to be acknowledged as superior, is often what leads to their downfall.
It's a fascinating paradox.
Yeah, it really is.
And speaking of paradoxes, the case of the Cleveland torso murderer is one that has baffled investigators for decades.
That name sounds familiar. But I can't quite place it.
It's a gruesome case from the 1930s. This killer dismembered at least 12 victims, leaving their remains scattered throughout the city of Cleveland.
It sounds like something out of a horror movie.
It was a truly horrifying time for the city. Profilers noted that the killer had a high level of anatomical knowledge, suggesting someone with medical or butchering experience. They also observed a disturbing level of precision in the dismemberments, indicating a certain pride in the killer's work.
It's chilling to think that someone could take such pride in such horrific acts.
It is.
And what makes this case even more intriguing is that the killer was never caught.
I know.
Despite extensive investigations and numerous suspects, the Cleveland torso murderer remains an enigma to this day.
A true mystery.
Lost
to the annals of time.
It's incredible to think that even with all our modern forensic techniques,
I know, right?
some cases remain beyond our grasp.
It's a humbling reminder that the criminal mind can be a labyrinth. And even the most brilliant detectives sometimes find themselves lost within its twists and turns.
Mystery Files also featured a case that really highlighted the challenges of catching serial killers. Who are transient, adaptable, and driven by a compulsion to harm. The I-5 killer, Randall Woodfield. What made him so difficult to catch?
Woodfield was a mobile predator,
Right.
moving quickly and striking seemingly at random along the I-5 corridor in the Pacific Northwest. He combined spontaneity with a chilling level of planning, which made him incredibly difficult to track and predict. He was like a chameleon, blending into different environments and preying on women who crossed his path.
It's like he was a predator in the truest sense.
Yeah.
Stalking his prey across vast distances, always searching for the next opportunity to strike.
Precisely. And his case highlights the need for interagency cooperation and communication.
Right.
As his crimes span multiple jurisdictions.
Right.
It was only through the collaborative efforts of law enforcement agencies across different states that they were finally able to connect the dots and bring him to justice.
It's a reminder that these types of predators don't respect boundaries or jurisdictions.
Nope.
They move freely, exploiting vulnerabilities wherever they find them.
That's right.
And that brings us to another case that spanned multiple states and terrorized communities for years. The East Area Rapist, later known as the Golden State Killer.
The Golden State Killer case is a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of preserving evidence, and the incredible advancements in DNA technology that have revolutionized criminal investigations.
Wasn't he eventually identified as Justice D'Angelo?
It was.
A former police officer?
Yes.
What a shocking revelation.
It was.
And his case highlights how profiling can keep an investigation alive, even when all hope seems lost. The profile created in the 1970s and 80s painted him as a meticulous, organized individual who escalated from burglaries to sexual assaults and eventually to murder.
It was this profile, combined with the tireless work of investigators and the groundbreaking use of genetic genealogy that finally brought him to justice decades after his crimes.
It's a powerful reminder that justice can prevail.
Yes.
Even when it seems impossible.
It is.
And Mystery Files also touched on a case that's still active.
Oh, yes.
Still haunting investigators and the public alike. The Long Island serial killer, or LISK. What makes this case so terrifying and challenging for law enforcement?
The LISK case is a chilling example of how a predator can operate undetected for years, choosing victims carefully and disposing of their bodies in a way that makes discovery difficult. The victims in this case were predominantly women involved in sex work, and the killer targeted remote dumping grounds, suggesting a high level of familiarity with the area and a meticulous approach to covering his tracks.
It's heartbreaking to think that their vulnerability made them easier targets.
It really is.
And the fact that he's still out there, still preying on vulnerable women, makes it all the more unsettling.
It does.
And it speaks to the ongoing challenges of investigating serial killers, particularly those who are organized, adaptable, and capable of blending into society seamlessly.
It's a sobering thought.
It's like trying to build a dam against a flood, knowing that the water will always find a way to break through.
And sometimes those floods of violence seem to defy explanation, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and chilling speculation.
Are you talking about the smiley face killer theory?
That's right.
I've heard about that.
Yeah.
But it's always seemed more like an urban legend than a real case.
That's what makes it so fascinating.
Right.
The theory suggests a potential link between a series of mysterious drownings of young men across several states, with smiley face graffiti found near some of the scenes.
But it's never been proven, right?
Correct. And that's part of the intrigue. While some believe it's the work of a serial killer or a group of killers, others maintain that these are simply tragic accidents.
It's like a puzzle with no solution. A mystery that continues to haunt the public imagination.
Precisely. And it speaks to our fascination with the unknown, our desire to find patterns and meaning, even in the face of tragedy and uncertainty.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from the meticulous methods of organized killers like Ted Bundy and Gary Ridgway, to the psychological complexities of cases like the Zodiac Killer and the Monster of Florence. It's clear that profiling is a powerful tool. But it's not a magic bullet.
No.
It requires careful analysis, critical thinking, and a willingness to adapt and evolve as new evidence emerges.
Absolutely. Profiling is as much an art as it is a science. It's about understanding human behavior, recognizing patterns, and using that knowledge to guide investigations and hopefully to bring justice to those who deserve it most.
So as we wrap up this part of our exploration, I'm left with a sense of awe at the complexity of criminal profiling and the dedication of those who work tirelessly to protect us from the shadows. But I'm also left with a sense of unease. Knowing that there are still monsters out there.
That's right.
Still mysteries to be solved. Still stories waiting to be told.
That's the reality of the world we live in.
But by understanding the methods, the challenges, and the ethical considerations involved in criminal profiling, we can all play a part in making our communities safer.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with the final part of this episode after a quick break.
Okay.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the world of criminal profiling.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has. And, I think it's fascinating how profiling has really evolved from this almost like kind of mystical idea to a much more scientific approach.
Definitely.
But, there's still those lingering mysteries.
Oh, absolutely.
That have captivated the public imagination theories that continue to be debated even today.
You're talking about the smiley face killer theory.
Yeah, the smiley face killer theory. Exactly.
It's one of those enigmas that just refuses to fade away.
It really does.
Fueled by speculation and circumstantial evidence.
Yeah, it's like a modern-day urban legend. Yeah.
This idea that a secret society, or like a lone wolf, is preying on young men across the country, leaving behind this chilling calling card, a simple smiley face.
The theory suggests a potential link between a series of drownings of young men in different states, often near bodies of water where smiley face graffiti has been found.
Okay, so that's the connection they're making.
Right.
Is there any real evidence to support this theory, or is it just a case of people connecting dots that aren't really there?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Some investigators and private citizens who have researched these cases believe there are too many similarities to just dismiss the theory as mere coincidence.
Okay.
They point to patterns in the victims' profiles, the circumstances surrounding their deaths, and the recurring presence of the smiley face graffiti.
So what do professional profilers make of it?
Well, it's a divisive issue within the profiling community, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Some profilers acknowledge that the sheer number of similar drownings warrants further investigation.
Okay.
They suggest that the smiley face graffiti could be a way for the perpetrator or perpetrators to taunt authorities or claim credit for their crimes.
The most like a signature, a twisted calling card.
Yeah, exactly.
Left behind to mark their territory.
That's right.
But what about the other side of the argument?
Well, skeptics argue that drownings, especially among young men who may be intoxicated or engaging in risky behavior, are sadly not uncommon.
Sure.
They suggest that the presence of smiley face graffiti could be purely coincidental.
Okay.
Or even a copycat phenomenon inspired by media coverage of the theory itself.
So it's like this giant question mark hanging over these cases, a mystery that may never be definitively solved.
Precisely. And that's what makes it so fascinating, right? It speaks to our inherent desire to find patterns, to make sense of the seemingly random and chaotic.
Right, to make sense of the chaos.
And in the absence of concrete answers, speculation and theories often fill the void.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most compelling mysteries are those that remain unsolved.
Right.
Those that continue to challenge our understanding of the world and the darkness that can lurk within it.
Speaking of unsolved mysteries, we can't wrap up this deep dive without revisiting the Long Island serial killer.
Right.
Or SK, a case that has haunted investigators and the public for over a decade.
That one hits close to home.
It does, doesn't it?
For so many people,
Right.
The idea of a killer
Right.
stalking the familiar beaches and towns of Long Island, preying on vulnerable women is truly terrifying.
It is.
And the lack of a definitive suspect, combined with the methodical nature of these crimes, creates this pervasive sense of fear and uncertainty.
What are some of the key challenges that investigators have faced in this case?
Right.
Why has it been so difficult to identify and apprehend LASKD? Well, the killer's apparent familiarity with the remote areas of Long Island, where the victims' bodies were found, suggests someone who's local, someone who knows the terrain and can move through it undetected.
It's like they have an intimate knowledge of the landscape.
Right.
A hidden map that allows them to disappear into the shadows.
Exactly. And the choice of victims, primarily women involved in sex work, adds another layer of complexity.
Okay.
These women are often marginalized, their disappearances sometimes going unnoticed for longer periods, which gives the killer a head start.
It's a tragic reality.
It really is.
Their vulnerability makes them easier targets. And the stigma associated with their work can sometimes hinder investigations.
Unfortunately, that's true.
And then there's the meticulous nature of the crimes themselves.
Right.
The killer carefully selects his dumping grounds, wraps the bodies, and takes steps to avoid leaving behind traceable evidence.
Right. It's the hallmark of an organized offender.
Yeah.
Someone who plans meticulously and takes deliberate steps to minimize their risk.
Exactly.
And that level of sophistication makes the task of identifying and apprehending LISK even more daunting.
It's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
But the investigators haven't given up, right?
No, not at all.
They're still actively pursuing leads, hoping for that breakthrough that will finally bring this nightmare to an end.
Absolutely. The pursuit of justice never ends.
That's right.
And as technology advances, as new investigative techniques emerge,
Yeah.
there's always hope that even the most baffling cold cases will eventually be solved.
We've reached the end of our deep dive.
We have.
And I have to say, it's been an eye-opening experience.
It has.
We've delved into the minds of detectives, explored the intricacies of criminal profiling, and confronted the unsettling reality that darkness can lurk in the most unexpected places.
It certainly can.
We've learned that profiling is a powerful tool.
It is.
But it's not a perfect science.
Not at all.
It's a constantly evolving field that requires careful analysis, critical thinking, and a deep understanding of human behavior.
Yeah, it really does.
So as we wrap things up, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember from this exploration?
I would say it's this. While we may never fully understand the motivations behind every crime, by learning about the methods, the challenges, and the ethical considerations involved in criminal profiling, we can all gain a deeper appreciation for the tireless work that detectives do to protect us from the shadows.
That's right.
And perhaps we can even become more aware of the subtle signs of danger, more attuned to the vulnerabilities that exist within our own communities.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
And on that note, we'd like to thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this journey into the heart of darkness and the minds of those who dare to chase the shadows.
Yes.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.